I've always been happy to see either a new Doctor Who series or a regeneration. Back when I was a wee lad in the 70s, I remember being confused and asking my mum why John Pertwee had turned into Tom Baker, and thus started my lifelong love and occasionally contempt for a show that has followed me throughout my entire life. When I became a teenager, I luckily found equally geeky friends to wax lyrically about Doctor Who too, and was happy Tom finally gave it a rest, as it seemed he'd been around for ages. I have to be honest, by the time it got to Sylvester McCoy, I pretty much didn't bother watching after the infamous cliffhanger episode, as I found the show to have become embarrassing. Plus, I'd left school, got a job, was enjoying going out, drinking and admiring ladies from afar. Roll forward to the wilderness years, where I moved in with a bunch of fellow hippie slackers like myself and would while away the many evenings watching VHS copies of the show and discussing it in depth late into the small hours with many beers. Roll forward even many more years later, and it came back bigger and louder. I was even more or less responsible, footloose and fancy-free. I adored the new stuff just as much as the old stuff. I eventually got married, had kids, and became a bitter old git Doctor Who fan, complaining about preachy speeches, long arms, bland companions, 1990s computer game graphics being used in the year 2024, etc., etc. Which brings me nicely to the Space Baby, Ncuti Gatwa's proper full frontal foray into the role of the Doctor. My overall impression of Space Babies was great. It was a fun romp to get the new viewers invested and for families to sit together and watch the episode. I certainly had a lot of fun with my kids watching it, and it was lovely to have a script that flowed so effortlessly apart from one part, which I shall discuss later. I thought the story opened strongly, which on paper it shouldn't. You wouldn't normally have 5 minutes of recap for new viewers plus a scene that doesn't really go anywhere, but it did work. I enjoyed the splashing out of cash from the larger budget to do the butterfly effect sketch, which is something Auntie B would never allow. Plus the recap gave both the actors a chance to shine, with little else but the dialogue and camera angles. It set up the following story really nicely for us to get rearing to go on an adventure with our dynamic duo. The main story itself was charming. It was aliens with babies instead of adults. It had a great monster and tense moments. The plot, dialogue and world buildings always drove the story forward. The babies were cute and it tugged at my heartstrings when they said they'd never been hugged. Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson not only had fantastic chemistry, but they also looked like they were having so much fun doing it. But most importantly, Ncuti is a fantastic Doctor. He's caring, intelligent, fascinating, eccentric, otherworldly, and do I have to point out how utterly charismatic he is. To stop the episode from getting a bit too Christmas episode rompish, I was pleased to see future events were being set up. When the Doctor tells Ruby she can't go back to a point where she was left as a baby, this wasn't just a simple plot device, it harks back to the 10th Doctor and the episode Father's Day, where Rose is warned about doing something similar. I would also enjoy the ending, where something has been set up for throughout the series. This is a device I actually really enjoy. My particular favourite of the series of New Who is Series 3, with the very underrated Martha Jones. The ending leaves us to believe there is more to Ruby than meets the eye. I'm also still slightly holding out that the butterfly effect opening could also be an Easter egg for future stories. Yes, on the whole, I'm a big fan of this episode. However, there's a couple of downsides. First, I'm not overly sure if this is an episode that has the rewatch value that I enjoy about Doctor Who. I mean, certainly not in the way of Blink, City of Death, and Orphan 55. The other issue I have is the message about refugees. It wasn't the message itself. It was just the fact that it kind of jolted me out of enjoying the show. It felt really shoehorned and preachy, and it didn't sit with the rest of the episode. I mean, I can almost guarantee that if it wasn't a political message, that this line would have been jettisoned straight away. Because quite frankly, I found it quite a clumsy piece of exposition, and in an otherwise really tightly written script. All in all, a great start to the new series. I'd like to start this review with a poem what I wrote. Cross-dressing, Doctor Who and music. I've never combined all three. But along comes the Devil's Chord. God bless ya, RTD. As you can imagine from my crawling embarrassing fanboy doggerel, my verdict about the Devil's Chord was, it was... brilliant! Seriously, What was to not like about it? The start was instantly captivating, straight away with a scene that would not look out of place in the episode The Family of Blood. Yes, I know that episode took place in 1913 and the opening of The Devil's Chord took place in 1925. And even though I had an issue with the preachy speech in The Space Babies, I thoroughly enjoyed the them quip from Maestro.
I'm them.
It was used to great effect because it had that kind of modern day outrage sensibility, but it was also hinting that the Maestro and his son, possibly are they one and the same? Clever. It was great to see the Doctor and Ruby get excited about dressing up, because normally it's like, oh, come on, let's get some stuff where they just come out in their normal clothes. But this time, we can see RT was really making use of that unfeasibly large Disney budget. You know, no staying in the same outfits week after week for Shooty and Millie, and don't they both look amazing in their 60s garb? I almost soiled my pants when I heard the giggle. And suddenly, Maestro's appearance was even more wonderful, knowing that Maestro was the first of the toy maker's legions.
My legions are coming.
Now, I know that the guys playing the Beatles came under a lot of flack for not looking like the Fab Four, but actually as a huge fan of the Beatles, I was pleasantly surprised at how great the actors were at being John and Paul. On the whole, Jinx Monsoon stole the show. Jinx at times was so over the top, but it didn't feel out of place. It was just the right level of madness. Anything else would have just been half-baked. The character would not have looked out of place among the Blue Meanies in the Yellow Submarine film. I could wax endlessly about Jinx. What a villain. And I hope to see Maestro return in the not-so-distant future, because this series is starting to really hot up. And as far as family viewing is going, not only did my kids enjoy the episode, they were discussing it in the car on the way to school a few days later.
Is that understood, Max?
This episode has divided fans. I'm obviously on the side of it being spectacular and a much needed breath of fresh air for the show. Others are calling it a joke and a disgrace, and they're saying things like, I stopped watching it when Capaldi left, and others are saying, well, I stopped watching it in 1997, and others are saying, well, for me, Doctor Who finished halfway through Tom Baker's tenures, and others are saying, I used to love it, but when he left the junkyard and visited the cavemen, well, it went downhill from there. Now, as someone that enjoys playing music badly, I loved the fact that the missing chord that banished Maestro was a nod to the final chord in Day of the Life, or as some people have said, the opening chord to It's a Hard Day's Night. However, due to licensing, RTD did say this: I thought that's a lovely idea, but at the same time, I knew that the Beatles' music is so expensive, even on a Disney budget, we couldn't afford that. So it was clearly supposed to sound like it was. Incidentally, the Day in the Life chord was created by having John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr and Mal Evans playing 3 different pianos with George Martin on a harmonium. They all played an E major chord simultaneously. And what do I think about the song and dance routine at the end? Well, as a fan of Bob Fosse and Glee, I thought it was great fun, and perhaps not quite as trite as it may come across. Let me explain. There's a theory going round on the Tinterweb that the entire series is taking place in a show within a show. Now, there's many reasons why. One of the main reasons is characters are constantly breaking the fourth wall, but what gives it away for me is this line. A Google AI overview explains that
non-diegetic is a term used in film and theater to describe sound that is external to the story world and is not heard by the characters, but is instead heard by the audience. Non-diegetic sound is also called commentary or non-literal sound. It is added to a film during post-production and can include Foley sound effects, traditional film music or score, voiceover narration, communicating messages between the filmmaker and the audience, creating mood or atmosphere, fostering suspense.
I can't tell you how long I've waited for Stephen Moffat to return and write for Doctor Who. This is the man, sorry, hush my mouth, dare I say it, genius, who gave us Silence in the Library, Heaven Sent, and possibly the greatest Doctor Who story of all time. No! Not Orphan 55, but the one that narrowly pipped it to the post. Blink. The God who gave us River Song and The Weeping Angels is finally back with aplomb. and a couple of pairs with Boom. Boom takes us to an alien planet where there is an ongoing war. We are introduced to religious soldiers. It's unclear if this is the Anglican army and is connected to the clerics in Time of the Angels and Flesh and Stone, but as they're both written by Moffat, I assume they are. The Doctor steps on a landmine, which doesn't go off now, but he can't move. The whole story is obviously an homage to the opening of the first episode of Genesis of the Daleks. The only difference is, Harry sorts out the problem quickly with a few rocks, and our merry trio quickly are on their way to have possibly one of the greatest Doctor Who adventures ever. On the whole, I was absolutely gripped throughout most of the episode. I enjoy episodes in TV shows when they try to do something a little different, like the episode David and Maureen in Psychoville, where the whole episode was done in 2 takes to make it look like one. Or Living in Harmony from The Prisoner, where the entire episode is played out like a western. And Boom was equally fantastic, as the whole episode stayed mostly in one place, and even though it was outdoors, it still gave you that sense of cabin fever. The cast was solid, and Keelan Springall, who played Splice, played her part really well. At first, I wondered why she wasn't so upset when her father died, but when she said,
"Silly, he's not gone. He's just dead. He's not gone,"
it made it all perfectly clear, and kind of put the Doctor a little in his place. I found the blind faith is bad and war is bad a little hammered home at times. It was pretty obvious to the viewers without having to have it signposted. Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mackey. Okay.
To be honest, these are small details, as the Doctor turns it around and says,
Just because I don't like it, doesn't mean I don't need it.
All in all, this reminded me of a top-notch Capaldi episode at its best. Simply put, sublime writing that can only be executed by talented acting. On another musical geeky note, the song that the 15th Doctor sings, which is called the Skyboat Song, is the same that the 2nd Doctor plays on his recorder in The Web of Fear.
Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on a wing, onward the sailors cry.
The original song was about a man lamenting about unrequited love to a cuckoo by the poet William Ross in 1782, called Cuckoo of the Tree. In 1870, Sir Harold Bolton, a singer and songwriter, penned fresh lyrics depicting Bonnie Prince Charlie's journey from Benbecula to the Isle of Skye, as he eluded capture by the government soldiers following his defeat at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Then in 1885, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote his own version because he didn't like Bolton's version. I am a fan of Robert Louis Stevenson, however, I prefer Bolton's lyrics, and apparently so does the 15th Doctor, and everybody else. In fact, when I did a little research of versions of the song, I couldn't actually find a Stevenson version. My overall verdict? It was brilliant, and the best episode so far. Oh, and the sad old man that once told the Doctor,
What survives of us is love,
was in fact Philip Larkin. It's a line from his poem, An Arundel Tomb, published in 1964.
Time has transfigured them into untruth. The stone fidelity they hardly meant has come to be their final blazon, and to prove our almost instinct almost true. What will survive of us is love.
Ah, Wales, Wales, Wales. Home to Richard Burton, Michael Sheen, and Shakin' Stevens.
Oh, goodness gracious. Right.
As Russell T Davies is a Welsh native, it is only fitting for him to get some of his episodes in Wales to get a free holiday. I do the same myself. Go to Wales. Oh, I'm not Welsh. I just have no wish to revisit Shepherd's Bush in a hurry, never mind spend the holiday there. Our story, 73 yards, starts with the Doctor and Ruby in a picturesque Welsh cliff top, where the Doctor drops in a quote about a future dangerous Prime Minister. steps on the ferry circle where they discover some scrolls, and one says,
"Rest in peace, Mad Jack."
Suddenly, the Doctor disappears. A strange old woman is at a distance, and no matter how much Ruby tries to talk to the old woman, she can't get close to her. Ruby asks a random walker what the old woman wants.
I haven't met you before, have I?
I don't think so.
Have you? No, that was a different...
And the walker tries, but runs away in terror. Ruby stays in a weird local pub which is acted brilliantly, where the strange old woman makes a local man run away in terror. Ruby goes back to London, and over a long period, the woman is constantly at 73 yards. Even Unit can't get rid of her.
Disengage.
Eventually, she hears about Roger ap Gwilym and realises what she's needed to do all along and why she's in this predicament.
Mad Jack, they used to call me.
Mad Jack.
Roger ap Gwilym. That's a bad example of the Welsh. Terrifying. The most dangerous prime minister in history.
She gets in with his campaign team and stands 73 yards away, encouraging Roger ap Gwilym to run away, resign as MP, and thus narrowly avoiding a nuclear disaster. So far, most fans have been falling over themselves with praise over this episode, some describing it as one of the best New Who episodes, and even certainly one of the best New Who episodes, and I would have to agree. There have been some negatives, of course, as there always is. There's a hell of a lot of naysayers out there that like to knock the episode, not because it wasn't good, because of the following reasons. This wasn't an episode of Doctor Who, it was more like an episode of Inside Number 9.
It's like the time and relative dimension in space. TARDIS.
And this wasn't an episode of Doctor Who, it was more like an episode of Black Mirror. And this wasn't an episode of Doctor Who, it was more like an episode of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Yes! By the way, it's none of these. In fact, it's a homage to M.R. James, who was an English medieval scholar and horror writer from the early 20th century. His connections to television were his stories were a staple at the Yuletide season in the 1970s, with the anthology seasons Ghost Stories for Christmas, with The Stores of Barchester, 1971, A Warning to the Curious, 1972, Lost Hearts, 1973, The Treasure of Abbot Thomas, 1974, and The Ash Tree, 1975. Interestingly, Doctor Who writer and actor Mark Gatiss helped to continue the M.R. James theme in Ghost Stories for Christmas in the 2000s, so it's no surprise that RTD has also taken up the mantle in his own inimitable way. It's particularly like the 1972 edition, A Warning to the Curious. Let me elaborate. Picturesque setting, lone main character, something old gets disturbed which brings about a strange entity, bad ending for a main character. Picturesque setting, lone main character, something old gets disturbed which brings about a strange entity, bad ending for a main character. I re-watched A Warning to the Curious again and I found it equally as mesmerising as 73 Yards. A criticism 73 Yards had was that the third act was rushed, but I disagree. The pace of the third act mirrored Ruby's determination to get rid of Roger ap Gwilym, who is expertly played by Aneurin Bernard. He had a simmering, quiet, arrogant, sinister aura about him, unlike an embarrassing, third-rate Dick Dastardly I will not mention.
The strategy, the consciousness.
I don't think so.
Another criticism I noticed was, it didn't make sense at the end. Wah! Look, as with M.R. James, there needs to be a little bit of ambiguity when you finish a story, something to keep you thinking and guessing, and that's exactly what 73 Yards did. It's not Love Island, you know. Interesting fact, because Ncuti Gatwa was still filming Sex Education, it needed to be Dr. Light. Now, because of that, it was the first episode of the series filmed. Considering the limitations of not getting a chance to get to grips with the character, I thought Millie was brilliant. Hats off to you. This was the best episode in the series so far. But it wasn't just the best episode so far, it was.
You were fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
Just brilliant. What was that sound? That was the sound of Russell T Davies dropping the mic. Ooh, one last thing. Did you get the reference to the spin-off series?
The war between the land and the sea.
Social media. I was there when there wasn't any at all. And all those digital platforms were just an abandoned beach. If you wanted to know what people were up to or what dress they wore at a party, you had to actually walk up to them and ask them and say, "Excuse me, what dress did you wear at that party?" And they would regularly reply back to me, "I've never worn a dress in my life, you pervert." Then along came MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat. And now I can finally find if my mate Gary did wear a dress at that party without getting a punch in the mouth for asking. And along with social media came social stupidity. It was inevitable that Doctor Who would tackle the dangers of social media, and this was a wonderful take on that. This episode was touted by Russell T Davies to Stephen Moffat years ago, but it was considered to be too expensive at the time. However, we're able to do it now with today's modern technology, better and cheaper. It was weird to have another Doctor-like episode after 73 Yards. However, I wonder if the amazing 73 Yards just needed to be followed up by another strong story, which this was. It definitely has that Black Mirror vibe about it, which isn't a bad thing, particularly the episode Nosedive, where society lives in a world where everyone puts their life on social media to get the highest ratings possible. Dot and Bubble follows a similar premise, where young, beautiful people living in a city called Fine Time, where they complain about having to do work for 2 hours a day, and they spend the rest of their time immersed in social media, created by a mechanical dot which projects a bubble around their heads. They're so immersed in that bubble, they need the bubble to even tell them which way to walk. Loads of positives to say about this episode. Callie Cook, from the very funny and very silly Henpocalypse, was absolutely fantastic, and she owned the episode. She held the whole story perfectly, and even though she was utterly vacuous as a character, we were somehow still concerned for her and wanted her desperately to escape, until obviously she turned it around with that killer blow at the end. But all in all, she was absolutely stunning. I look forward to seeing her in other shows and films. Slugs, great. Up there with the Yetis and the Slovene. It was good to have a good scary monster, something for the small children to hide behind the couch. Really like the Ricky character. I love the way Ricky went from like vacuous social media character to likeable, brilliant hero, just to have him executed by someone who claimed to hero worship him. And that version of Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini was an inspired choice of a pointless throwaway song that, you know, and what I loved about it was Ricky didn't really seem to do anything apart from just like mince about a little bit while the track was playing. I have to say, I wasn't too impressed about the way the Dot killed Ricky. I felt at this point the show was kind of having its cake and eating it. You know, basically everyone's getting eaten by slugs, which was great, but we didn't really never get to know why they were really there in the first place. And then for no reason, Ricky gets killed by the Dot. Now, I felt that was kind of a happy dose of sort of Deus Ex Machina, where, you know, it's a Latin term which translates to like God from the machine. It originates from ancient Greek theatre, where a God character would be lowered onto the stage via a crane, and they'd solve like an unsolvable problem just right at the end, you know, for a convenient solution.
Oh no, how will we ever get back to Bikini Bottom now?
I can take you there.
Who are you?
I'm David Hasselhoff.
Hooray! So where's your boat?
Boat?
Go, Hasselhoff!
Like in modern storytelling, Deus Ex Machina it's like criticised as lazy story writing, and instead of arising organically from the character, the theme, or the plot, the resolution is kind of imposed out of nowhere. The plot suddenly gets solved out of absolutely nowhere, leaving the audience kind of feeling cheated or disconnected. Saying that, I was not expecting that ending. That ending was bleak and brutal. I haven't seen an ending as bleak and brutal as that since Earthshock, or the time when I realised they were actually serious about the third-rate Dick Dastardly was actually going to be the master, and it wasn't some kind of cruel April Fool joke.
I don't think so!
I read many comments on social media straight afterwards, and many comments were saying things like, well, if they don't want help, then they shouldn't help them. I wouldn't do that. I myself had this same thought, but maybe that's what makes the Doctor. And it's only expanded further by Nshute's stunning performance at the end, that frustration he had. And I felt myself as for Ricky, how would he have felt about Lindy Pepperbean's reaction to the Doctor? He'd been out his bubble, he'd read books, I think he would have decided to go with the Doctor, maybe even become a new assistant, and perhaps that could have made them all see the error of their ways. Perhaps not. I like to think of TV as a lovely plate of sausages. Your script is like a pig that needs to go through a mincing machine, and once it's all churned out and put in skins, out comes a lovely plate of sausages. However, once in a while, the machine breaks down, and all that comes out is a pig, which just needs to be thrown into the bin to be fed to rats and foxes. On a rare occasion, someone says, we haven't got time to make sausages now, let's just stick that pig on a plate and hope no one notices or are too polite to say anything. Which brings me nicely onto the pig on a plate episode of Doctor Who called Rogue. An episode so thin, so poorly written, so badly thought out, and so misguided that it wastes airtime and a talented cast. Initially, I was excited to see Jonathan Groff was going to be in this episode, as I previously enjoyed his performances as Jesse St James in Glee, Christoph in Frozen, and King George in Hamilton. My excitement, however, quickly waned within the first few minutes of this abysmal episode. This is the plot, if you can call it that. Some aliens try to take over humans, and then they get stopped. Seriously, that is it. Oh, and there's a pointless forced love interest shoehorned in. It is supposed to be brave and significant.
I don't think so!
I always thought Orphan 55 was one of the worst Doctor Who episodes ever, but at least you could laugh at it, because the episodes leading up to it were so dire, every week you were saying to yourself, surely it can't get any worse than this, and then it exceeded all your expectation of what the word crap really meant. Plus, the cast and characters, apart from Graham, were so shockingly inept it only added to the fun that they were too talentless and wooden to carry such an awful script. But Rogue followed 3 strong stories, and we know Gatwa, Gibson and Groff are all more than competent actors, so it just highlights that even with their talents they couldn't make a silk purse out of this fetid, decaying pig's carcass of a script. I mean, how the hell did this piece of toilet paper get past page 7 of the first reading stage, never mind being filmed and put out on Prime TV, is beyond me. One of my heroes, Roger Corman, he did a film called Little Shop of Horrors, and that was churned out in 3 days, because there was time left over from his previous film, Bucket of Blood. So he reused some of the same sets and some of the same actors to make the iconic B-movie that ended up as a Broadway play and a musical film. This is what Rogue feels like. Bridgerton finished a bit early, and someone quickly wrote a script and churned this out with a fraction of the charm and entertainment value of Little Shop of Horrors. Speaking of Bridgerton, did we really need to have so many references to it? The first one was funny enough, but maybe the script was so thin, they needed to drag it out in any way they could. Let's be honest, why did the episode take place in 1830? No reason, other than have all the actors dress up and have some fun. It did not help move the story forward. What was the point of the love interest? So we can have a groundbreaking kiss? Fair enough, but it certainly had nothing to do with moving the plot forward. And those aliens, seriously, did we not learn anything from the cat's reject in Orphan 55? Clearly in the meetings, no one was brave enough to put their hands up and say, guys, we've got a bigger budget from Disney. I really think we can stretch a little bit further than a Regency period costume with a random Halloween mask stuck on someone's head. Now let's talk about the character of Rogue. Let's be frank, he's a third-rate Jack Harkness with a very similar introduction. Cut out the middleman. Bring back Jack Barrowman already. He absolutely lit up the screen in Fugitive of the Judoon and Revolution of the Daleks. I would love to have him back in the show, and I think actually he could have helped drag this stinker of a script out of the gutter. This atrocious episode reminds me of watching stories like Mark and the Rani and Time of the Rani by Pip and Jane Baker. I felt like Andy from Shawshank Redemption wading through the prison sewage pipe to get to freedom. I felt so obliged to get to the end that even seeing Richard E. Grant in the montage of Doctors, which would normally have me jumping up and down with joy with geeky Who reverence, simply left me in a state of...
No, I don't really feel like it.
Seriously, what was the point of Ruby pretending to be a Cholder at the end? It served no purpose other than to drag things out. It set us up to think that she was dead, just for them to reveal about a minute later that she wasn't dead. And let's be honest, if you thought she was dead, you must have been recently hit yourself in the head really hard in the face with a shovel, and then you deserve to be dead. Oh, and the crying. Please, enough already. Stop. Once a series at the end of the last episode, perhaps if it really tugs at the heartstrings, but it's wearing a bit thin now. If that was me crying every week, my dad would be grabbing me by the neck by now and said, "Shut up, I'll give you something to cry about." And breathe. I really do hope I'm back to my happier, more positive self for next week's review of The Legend of Ruby Sunday. Do you agree or disagree with this review? Please leave your comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. Is this one of the best episodes of New Who? Stick around and you'll find out why. What can I say about The Legend of Ruby Sunday? It was smart, exciting, tense, it had a villain from one of my favourite classic Who stories, and I was transfixed throughout the whole episode. It's great to have RTD back after the utter, embarrassing, clickbait piece of hack churned out wrappings droppings of a script last week. So, I'm going to go through what I liked and what I didn't like about the story. So, first of all, it was great the way it gave 2 stars the opportunity to redeem themselves. Bonnie Langford is just amazing as Mel. I mean, she was great in the other story, but she's great this time round as well.
I love her so much.
And it's lovely to have an insight into how UNIT utilises former assistants. Yasmin Finney appears to have had some acting lessons and is now not doing an impersonation of a plank of wood.
You can act!
I mean, although she does appear to have absolutely nothing to do in this episode and even admits that herself.
It's like we're on a mission.
You know, they never give me proper work. They had me investigating shoplifting in Catford.
But thank God the script avoided making her the know-it-all entitled brat she was in The Beast.
You're assuming he as a pronoun. Something a male-presenting Time Lord will never understand.
Lovely little explanation of Susan.
If you've got a granddaughter, that means you've got kids.
Well, not quite. Not yet.
The fact that Doctor knows his granddaughter, however, due to timey-wimey stuff, he still hasn't actually had his daughter yet.
Maybe he already has.
Just a bit unlikely.
Brilliant! You were brilliant!
I really enjoyed the science of the time window. Being a bit of an AI enthusiast myself, I could see the possibilities of this technology. We can already expand photographs, put in visual and text prompts and sharpen images in seconds on an ordinary laptop. The whole sequence was well played out and wonderfully acted, right down to Colonel Chidozi, who may as well have just worn a red shirt from Star Trek, as it's pretty obvious he was going to die. It's a shame. He was actually a really great character. And there's been debates about, whether a VHS would still be used in 2004. And I have to say, it's definitely a yes, it would be. One of the last Hollywood films actually released on VHS was in 2006. I think it was called A History of Violence. So it's feasible for a CCTV camera to still be using VHS, especially if it's maybe like in a low crime area. The pace of the episode was second to none, and so was the tension. It built and built until we finally got to find out who our villain was. I have to be honest, I did not see that. There was the Susan technology, Sue-Tech bit, the whole Susan theory was kind of running through about his granddaughter, and it was enough of a misdirection for me not to see the reveals.
It was the wrong anagram.
top marks to RTD on that one. I mean, it totally threw me, you know. And on one hand, I was really overjoyed to see that this character was back. But almost straight away, I kind of thought to myself, you know, apart from old Git fans like myself and hardcore fans, would anyone else actually know who he is? Especially even really enthusiastic new Who's, you know? I mean, my daughter certainly had no idea who he was. So if you are like a new Who person, I'd love to know your thoughts or your comments about this. To me, it was a little bit like when I went to watch Avengers at the cinema. I went with like 3 geeky friends, okay? And when Thanos was at the end, we went, oh my God, it's Thanos. But you could feel almost the whole cinema going, huh? Who's that? But aside from that, it was brilliant for me. You know, Sutek's from Pyramids of Mars from 1975, and it's a story I hold close to my heart. It was a story that terrified me the most as a child, you know, and I found that actually recently, the reason why it's so embedded in my memory is because they actually repeated it like a 63-minute episode. So not only did they make me scared the first time round, they actually shoved the whole thing together in an hour's episode and terrified me again. I remember watching the episode through my fingers because our sofa was pushed up against the wall. Otherwise, I would have hid behind it.
They're scared. They're scared. I'm scared.
It all tied in with the He Who Waits, as it was firmed up in the end of episode 4 of Pyramid Mars that he would have lived another 7,000 years before he died. And it also cements that actually how powerful he was, okay, which is also mentioned in the episode. Pyramids of Mars is a brilliant story from the classic era with a fantastic plot, great actors, great characters. If you haven't seen it, I can't recommend it highly enough. And wasn't it brilliant to have Gabriel Wolf back as the voice of Sutek? You know, because he did actually play the part in Pyramids of Mars. Not bad for a man 91 years old. Again, I take my hat off to you. Love the fact that Susan actually ended up just being a vessel for Sutek rather than an actual villain themselves. Another bit of misdirection there. Really brilliant to see that Mrs. Flood has this dark side. We've been wondering about her for ages, and all of a sudden she's like, no, I'm not going to make you a cup of tea. There's a storm coming now. Shut up!
Well, we'd all like a lot of things that aren't going to happen. I'd be very careful, Mrs. Sunday. There's a storm coming in. He waits no more.
All in all, it was an excellent episode. And now I have to say my negatives. Be honest with you, my negatives are just nitpicking and didn't really bother me that much. As I said, I was happy to see Rose improve as a character, but I was a little bit confused about the fact that she admits that she doesn't really have anything much to do at UNIT, and all in all it made her character a little bit redundant, and it makes me wonder, you know, why was she in it at all? If she wasn't in the episode, would it have really made any difference to the actual narrative? I also wasn't overly impressed with the character of Maurice Gibbons. I couldn't see the point of introducing yet another new character in a scene where there were far too many people hanging about waiting to say their lines. That was one of my many gripes about the Chibnall era. I found his character actually jarred an otherwise excellent episode with like unnecessary exposition.
And I'm Maurice Gibbons, Unit Scientific Advisor, 13 years old, accelerated genius.
Go off.
Shirley Ann Bingham, played by Ruth Madeley, was clearly busy doing something else, and I liked her character, and it was sorely missed, as this episode would have been a nice way just to expand her character a little bit further. Was it one of the best episodes of New Who? Yes, it was. I mean, it's not perfect, but yes, for me this was a winner. All in all, a massive improvement on last week's episode, and I look forward to the finale, Empire of Death. Death. Agree or disagree? Please leave your comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So, we're finally at the end of Ncuti Gatwa's first series of Doctor Who, and I asked the question, was it worth the wait?
Well, let's find out!
First of all, it was great that RTD addressed a question I had last week about newer viewers not knowing who Sutek was by having a truncated version of Pyramids of Mars in Tales of the TARDIS. Although I was sad to see they cut my favourite line,
superstitious savage,
and they changed this piece of music from this to this. Series finales in any series are difficult ones to get right. One of my favourite seasons was season 3, and it had what I felt was a slightly lacklustre ending after such an incredible build-up with some of the best episodes of New Who. How did this series finale fare? First of all, I enjoyed the callbacks to previous episodes, particularly 73 Yards. The distance of the perception filter and how Ruby's alternative timeline helped to save the day as she has a foggy memory of her adventure. It was definitely worth watching the Pyramids of Mars version of Tales of the TARDIS because it gave us an explanation of the memory TARDIS and how it makes Tales of the TARDIS series more relevant and saved in exposition, although from watching Tales of the TARDIS to Empire of Death, wasn't it a little strange to not have Mel in Tales of the TARDIS?
I love her so much.
Speaking of exposition, wasn't there a lot of it? At first, I was happy with the energy of the story being taken down a notch, as too much action can be a lot to take in. In the play, Once in a Lifetime by George S. Kaufman and Moss Hart, there was a hilarious scene that ended up being cut for a calmer scene, where two characters simply talk on a train carriage. His producer, Sam Harris, said, "It's a noisy play, kid. One of the noisiest plays I've ever been around. Except for these 2 minutes at the beginning of the first act, there isn't another spot on this whole play where two people sit down and talk quietly to each other. It's a tiring play to sit through, kid." The whole story is worth reading from the excellent biography Act 1 by Moss Hart. However, as much as this was at first a welcome relief, I felt the story revolved around the exposition too much. For all of the Disney budget, did I really need to watch three people sitting around explaining the plot? Especially for such monumental consequences. Also, did anyone ever get that sort of Disney influence here? You know, there always seems to be this massive threat to the entire universe. I mean, just take Loki and Avengers Infinity War as examples, right down to the characters being snapped out of existence. A highlight for me again was Mel. I know the girl boss character has come under a lot of flack recently in other shows, but she hit the ground running here. Girl boss engaged. Girl boss activated.
Except fight.
And wasn't it beautiful when she looked at the Sixth Doctor's coat and her memories came flooding back without a word being spoken?
Oh God, I love her so much!
It was sad to see Millie Gibson go, who for me was the highlight of the entire series. She also hit the ground running as well, and she showed an acting ability and range well beyond her years. I could see her going on to bigger and better things, and the way she was written out was actually really beautiful, but on a selfish way, I'd like to have her back for like another series. Although her long goodbye was like very reminiscent of like David Tennant's goodbye, but it also made me feel that the final episode's plot was possibly a little thin on the ground. Again, it felt like RTD had kind of written himself into a corner with this fantastic build-up of last week.
I don't want to go.
So, taking the action down and having Ruby's mum just being ordinary was better than trying to have an explosive reveal that could only have been a letdown. So, in a way, the build-up was the exciting part, not the reveal. My biggest disappointment was when the Doctor talked about all the planets coming back, and I was waiting.
Clom.
Clom.
Clom, yes.
Clom? Clom's gone. Who want Clom?
I wanted Clom. In fact, I personally think they missed a trick there. Shame on you, RTD.
I spit on them.
I was also a little confused about the kind woman. I mean, who was the baby? Why did he need metal? I mean, I assume it's going to get resolved in future episodes, but there seemed to be a big build-up about it. You know, I found it just a little odd. It felt like just a bit flat. Is it Susan? But we've been down that track too many times already, haven't we? Oh, and I don't want to mention this.
Stop crying.
Stop crying.
Or this.
Yeah, I never understood what was all that Egyptian stuff.
Cultural appropriation.
Yeah, give us a break, Doctor.
Am I sorry that I didn't go to the cinema? No. Don't get me wrong, I would like to have seen Millie Gibson's Message.
And I just want to say a big thank you for you all coming out so late on a Friday night.
But there was an expectation that it was going to be big fun and gung-ho like The Giggle, but... it wasn't. I don't know about you, but I'm a bit confused about Mrs. Flood. I mean, is she evil? Was she taken over by Sutek? Is just faking being nice so she can do an E-17 impersonation on the roof? And then she tells us that...
I'm sorry to say his story ends in absolute terror.
Another universal, all-time shattering event. And that brings me back to my question. Was it worth waiting for? Kind of. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it was a little underwhelming. You know, basically everyone comes back to life and everyone's okay. I mean, even in Avengers, you know, Infinity War and Endgame, there was a payoff that the people who disappeared were gone for 5 years and the survivors had to cope with that. We've also had so many of these huge, far-reaching events across time and space that they're starting to lose their impact. I recently reflected on the William Hartnell story, The Massacre. I was lucky enough to see Ian Levine's AI reconstruction, and the ending is just quiet, tragic, and blunt. No huge world-shattering events, no super-powered aliens. When the Doctor and Stephen talk at the end, there's no exposition, there's no pulling out something at the last minute to save the day, just two people pondering over the ethics of their actions and inactions. Their silences are deafening. Just comparing the sombre ending of The Massacre with the big CGI spectacle of one of the most formidable beings ever in Who history being defeated with a dog collar. I know which I found more powerful. Do you agree or disagree? Please leave your comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to be back soon. I'm going to place the episodes from this season from worst to best. How would you list the episodes? I'd love you to leave your lists in the comments and I'll try and get through them in the next video and see if ours compare.